I think the most prominent example, both in my childhood and while working on Mentor Cruise as well, was my dad, because my dad was both a cautionary tale, but also an advisor of how I don't want to run the business. So he has had businesses in the past, but for most of his life, he was in a high performance sales job, actually. A lot of time spent on the road, a lot of time getting to customers, very much a traditional business where you need to like drive to the customer and shake hands and get a contract signed in person. But nevertheless, it's a job that's like long hours, high performance, high expectations from, bosses and stakeholders and so on. And so both me just observing that, but also him giving me advice was something that led to, me not wanting to run a business where I have external stakeholders, investors that like tie me down to a place or a time or a way of working. And with him, it ended up in like severe burnout multiple times, severe, stays in clinics in the end of the day and trying to just get everything fixed that was created by like stress and high expectations. And so I just never wanted to get into a situation like that. Again, my priority was independence, high quality of life. Those things were ultimately more important to me than both total earnings, but also obviously reputation and that kind of stuff. I think for him, it was a job where you spent most of your day in a suit and in a nice company car. So I think there's a lot of reputation and achievement that comes with it. And obviously the money's there as well. But the downside of it is pretty steep in terms of mental and physical health as well. I think if you spend most of your day in a car in between client meetings, that's also not great for your physical health. And so that's just, my priorities. Looking at that, my priorities have always been with quality of life and actually physical as well as mental health. Just, being able to take care of that and also having the space to take care of that.
Were you actively encouraged by your dad to build something with different values, or you saw this paradigm and you empathized and you were like, no, I don't want that?
Probably a little bit of both. More so because obviously I interacted with my dad and I knew that he wasn't satisfied with the situation. But then also I'm not sure whether he was aware or whether there were any opportunities at this point for him to, do things differently. And I think just me, growing up in a different time, a lot more digital, a lot more, new age, strong culture companies around, I maybe had a better, insight into kind of what's possible out there and a bit more exposure to these companies that were doing things a little bit differently. So probably, I was made aware of the problem by my dad, but then seeking the solution and finding a solution and doing things differently was something that I figured out myself and based on the values that I was given.
If I may ask, how does your dad feel about the way that you have structured your own business today?
Yeah, he loves it. I mean, at this point, he's actually retired. He and I share a lot of the same character traits in terms of being a tinker and a bit of a rebel in the sense of not wanting to do the same thing as the status quo. And so, he no longer needs to work and do a job like this, but he's now, in his tinkering phase as well, doing a lot of things with AI and, trying to build a bit of like a remote side incomes. He's going down the same path, his own medium and for his own requirements right now, fully on board with that and just kind of seeing it in action as well. Again, I think it's a product of its time as well, because I think if he tried to do the same thing 20, 25 years ago, it might not have been possible. The internet wasn't quite as fast and capable back then, and people weren't used to working remotely and online. So might have been a bit of a different story, but I think he agrees with me that this is the way to go if you want to have a business like this. Obviously, everyone has different values. I wouldn't recommend someone trying to conquer space to do a remote company, but in terms of building yourself a good and flexible life, it's probably the way to go.
If you would meet your dad in the same age that you are at the moment, what would you try to tell him, to influence him or advise him to do differently?
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is you will have to make a sacrifice at some point, right? And we were talking about it earlier. I think for a business like this to exist, you need to give up on some amount of growth and financial success. I think there were contracts in the past that we couldn't do because it would have meant staying online in time zones that wouldn't have been suitable for us. You know, being a smaller company, we're probably losing out on some of the enterprise contracts that like to see a 100-people team behind it and some funding and that kind of stuff. Let's go back 30 years and I'm talking to my dad. The same would kind of hold true there, where I don't think you can do the high reputation, very well paid sales job that gets you a lot of recognition from your peers and family and so on, where you have a nice shiny company car without a lot of stress. I think that's just the reality of, you know, doing that kind of job in like the 90s and early 2000s. And I'm actually not sure what choice he would make 30 years ago, but laying that out, you can go work for a startup, a local company, maybe something like this, and you're going to have still a great salary, and you're also going to have a lot of free time and a good life and some space to take a vacation and to travel and that kind of stuff. But obviously it's not going to come with the same benefits that the high reputation, high paid job comes. And making that decision, if you're just like thinking logically, and maybe as a young person, you think, oh, I can take a bit of stress. That's fine. Why wouldn't I go down that path? But from my side, seeing what happened with my dad and, you know, how it ended and how, you know, how tough these phases of burnout were, for me, it was like a cautionary tale, right? For me it was, okay, the last thing I want out of my life is like being in burnout clinics, basically. So I need to find a way around that. I need to find a way to not fall into those traps, basically. I think if I would have never seen that and someone would have come to me and say, hey, would you rather build $100 million billion company and be insanely rich and successful and be in Forbes and TechCrunch or whatever, or would you like to build a smaller business that allows you to live and travel everywhere? I'm not sure what I would have chosen. I think that's a product of growing up and experiences and seeing how things play out. But for me, that was the obvious choice to go down this path.